Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jude and Greg. So, Jude Hunt and Greg Gentry. And we're going to do something completely different, right? We're going to do something completely different. Jude came up with this idea of, Jude and me, really, but I think she was the creative force behind it. Came up with this idea of doing like a special series. And so, Jude's going to be is co-hosting, but actually she's properly hosting. I'm just the MC, I guess. I'm just the MC, the intro guy here. And Jude came up with this idea of finding home. And the first person that she had in mind to be interviewed on this special series of Finding Home was none other than Greg Gentry. And of course, I haven't seen Greg for ages, so it's great to have you both. And I'm looking forward to taking a bit of a back seat here. I'm thinking, should I string up a hammock and just watch you get on with it? And it would help to have a hammock, but I ain't got one. But it's warm. It's really warm in Yorkshire today. Like spring has arrived. I don't know what it is it's like mid-60s, and people are wearing shorts.
Wow.
Not just the postman. British postmen have this thing about wearing shorts. Anyway, I'm waffling on. Jude.
Yes. Hi.
Over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'm really excited to be interviewing Greg. One, because we're friends and I know you, I know your heart, I know a little bit about your journey. And two, because of the way you serve in the adoptee community with Adoptees Connect, with your fireside interviews. And I know that your presence, the way you hold space, and the way you conduct these interviews touches a lot of people. And I think that they also want to get to know you a little bit more. And I've seen bits and pieces as a friend observing of your journey toward home. As adoptees, we have a really unique lived experience of first starting life with relinquishment, then experiencing and holding space for two families. And we kind of live in that liminal space, and it's unique. And I think that through that, we navigate trauma, we navigate loss, grief, right? These are aspects that we live with, that we contend with, and we try to, through those things, uncover and unravel and find ourselves, our own identity, and find home within ourselves and create home in life. And so I want to start off asking you, for you, what is home? What does home mean to you? How do you define home?
It's been, well, first of all, thanks so much, Jude and Simon, for having me here. It's a big honor to speak with you about this. And I appreciate all your kind words. And home has been an elusive thing for me. And I think as I talk to other adoptees, it seems like that's, I won't say necessarily universal, but certainly widespread. And for me personally, it's been compounded by losses after coming out of the adoption fog. When my created family life became unstable and eventually, unfortunately, fell apart, leading to divorce and estrangement. Hopefully reconciliation is coming in that. But I will say that what home has meant for me, kind of, I feel like, we think about home as being a physical place sometimes, right? Maybe that's an unsophisticated way of thinking about home. It's actually become a more sophisticated way of it for me in a way, because the situation I found myself in led to me kind of being unrooted, physically unrooted. I was bouncing everywhere, but I felt wherever I was trying to settle, there was a part of me that wouldn't allow me to settle because I thought this isn't the final landing place for me right now because of circumstances of my life. This isn't where I want to settle. I don't want to settle physically, but I also don't want to settle in the sense of compromise or saying this is where I'm going to end up and this is my lot in life and this is how I'm situated. So we can talk about home as something inward. I know that's a big thing, a big theme, I think, with you, Jude, of what does a person find inwardly that feels like home. I have to say, as somebody who's been now displaced from my physical home with the loss of my family, that I am looking for the permanence of a geographical physical location, at least as part of my definition of home, because I feel that unrootedness too. Not just inward unsettling, but also physically, like I don't belong somewhere right now. That's coming to an end. I'm finding a better permanent place to be, but I've strenuously avoided, for example, saying that that I live somewhere. You've heard me say often I stay somewhere. For the past 2 years, even before we were talking about this, I spoke about just saying I was staying places versus I was living there, because living felt like a permanence that was too elusive for me. It wasn't something I was prepared to say that I was at that state of my life where I was going to be living somewhere. But now I am thinking I'm finding home, and it involves people, involves community of people and support. It involves that inward, maybe contentedness might be a strong word, but a sense of peacefulness and equanimity to a degree inside of me. And I think also there's a big spiritual component to it.
Love that. So you're talking about inner and outer, which I love because our outer world really is a reflection of our inner world. And so as you're finding community, right? Um and I think even a sense of home within, what does that feel like? What does home feel like? How do we know when we're home, right? Is it resonance? Like, is there kind of a goal? Like, because it seems when I'm listening to you talk, you're like, I created this home and it fell apart, right? It sadly, like it didn't work out and you found yourself unrooted and you didn't want to settle. And so that tells me that you knew something, right? Like you were looking for something inward, and you may not have even been aware of it. Can you talk about maybe that feeling that you don't want to settle, you want that?
Yeah, you mentioned the word goal in there. That's really important for me from a philosophical and existential standpoint, because that's this word sometimes we use teleology and the telos, the goal, the end, the place you're heading to is a big part of this, right? And it can be something that I think is transcendent in us as created persons, that there's part of us that will always have that longing, and maybe we don't know where that ends up, but we have a direction. Possibly we get aligned to say I'm headed towards a focal point. I don't know what it looks like there, but at least I'm facing the direction of it. At some point in my life, I've gained enough clarity and done enough introspective thinking to say I know which direction I think that lies. And the goal, the telos, the end there, then becomes a little easier to determine, and you start to steer towards it, and you make course corrections along the way. And I think as you get there, then you have to figure out whether or not it's actual physical place, or whether it remains completely transcendent in our lives, in our lifetime. But we get closer to what that approximation will be. So for me, it's that is contentment enough to say I'm facing what I believe is the right direction, and I'm making advances, and I'm feeling more contentment in my life as I get farther along in it. And maybe I won't see in my life that I'm at this final destination, but I'll be feeling more of the home feelings as I get closer to it.
So I hear contentment. I'm reading into it peace,
Yeah.
right? Peace with self, right? And for me, home was about finding felt sense of safety and belonging, right? So that wherever I go, I can be my most authentic self in that moment, because that does transform and change over time. You mentioned the elusivity of it, right? That it can be elusive, and that deep longing, we know, Pirate, right? Which means a deep longing for something, especially home. And I love this Maya Angelou quote and swore I was going to squeeze it in. So the ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned. And I think that's Hiraeth, right? That ache for home that lives in all of us. And that elusivity, um, talk about that a little. I think that definitely stems possibly from our childhood, right? Like where we were in a home that maybe didn't feel like home, and it things felt elusive for us to be ourselves, and maybe share a little of that with us.
Sure. I think that I'll say I believe it is a universal human thing for people to want that sense of belonging and that higher and again I'm going to use language of transcendence. And by that I don't mean something splendid. I just mean that it seems to be part of our makeup, coming from the ground of our being, the source of our being, that we're installed with these categories as ways of thinking and feeling and sensing and determining that, yeah, something's not quite the way it should be, or it's not finalized in a certain way. And it does manifest as this ache or this yearning for something that's beyond what we're experiencing right now. And it's a pull. So that's part of teleology too. I think it's a pull towards that end point, even though you can't see it as clearly along the way necessarily all the time. But with Hiraeth, for example, speaking with other adoptees who often use that word, I think for us in particular, part of the solution normally would come for people who are kept as part of what the safety would have been and the attachment would have been in early childhood, right, from being born, that wasn't there, and makes Hiraeth even more of a compounded issue for us, of something it's like extra or superlative in the sense of we have even more things to deal with because even that initial security wasn't there. And I think that actually translates partly, I believe, to why it's difficult when you speak with non-adopted people to get them to entirely understand where you're coming from, because they've always felt that at least level of security. It doesn't mean that their home life was great, but at least there were certain elements of their humanness that were more intact than ours were when that rift happened, when that relinquishment happened. So I feel like the quote in particular, the emphasis on the aching part, it does apply across all of humanity, but I feel like for us in particular, for people who've been severed, that we have that extra layer of, there's sadness to it, there's more of an unrest to it, it's more of an uncertainty about it for us.
Yeah, it feels more acute, I think.
Acute, that's a good,
Yeah. And I really am enjoying like your languaging, your wording, because to me it reminds me and points to having that sensory awareness, like and learning to listen to our bodies and their guidance, because I do believe that it is innate and woven into us to have this kind of searching, right? And this yearning. And I love to call my body my enchanted compass, right? So learning to listen to it. And it is what guided me home to self and to being able to create that in my life. And so in that journey, I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but I want to ask, is there a place that you go and or a thing that you do that makes you feel home in your body? Right.
For me right now, it's
Mm-hmm.
community and connecting with people who have similar experiences to mine,
Yeah.
because the physical part has been difficult for me in terms of negotiating all of that after post-divorce and moving to
Mm-hmm.
back to an old state, say a new state physically, geographically. the settledness part where the place of most contentment for me right now, almost like the locus of where I feel that the most strongly, is in the midst of people who, and it's not that you're sharing all the time about it with them either. You're not just constantly talking about this necessarily, but because of the shared experience that underlies and undergirds the conversation and the tone, and again, this word contentment that I use here. And it doesn't mean you're fully satisfied with absolutely everything going on, because I think we would agree there's a kind of a raw deal that's happened to us here. But at least in the midst of that, to have the company of people, the cloud of witnesses, so to say, people that can understand that, has been the place where I go to feel that way. So I reach out to people a lot. And I don't do that for selfish reasons. Like, I want to feel better, I'm going to reach out to so and so. I get the sense that that's what they need as well, and there's a reciprocity there, so that I'm getting some of my needs met, as well as helping them know they're important to me too. And then collectively that translates to me as a greater sense of where I'm feeling the home at this point.
I do agree. I have found in the adoptee community, support, encouragement. I think there is a sense of safety in the understanding, right? That comes from that shared experience. And I think the validation of it, right, and affirmation is really helpful for um, just navigating, resolving it, moving forward. And yeah, that belonging, that creating a sense of belonging. I was gonna say drumming, because
Yeah,
you drum, and I picture you drumming and really connecting to a felt sense of safety and being very true to something within yourself. You want to share anything about that, or how you feel when you drum, or like,
yeah.
is that a place you go to?
It's a
Yeah.
complicated situation because I have certain technical physical limitations around drumming, and I actually have injuries right now that in my fingers that are keeping me from being able to do a lot with it. Um, I would like to say that I think probably it's natural for people to associate almost like a primal connection to drumming, right? Something very, very primordial and natural, of this is the pulse, right? That's kind of what drumming is a pulse, or a series of rhythms that mirror what happens in life. And you can arrange them all different ways. You can speed them up and slow them down. You can mix them up. Uh, it's interesting that, because drumming, we have this expression, marching the sound or the beat of your own drum, or your own drummer. And we use that as individualism, people being off, knowing their direction in life, and not being discouraged or thrown off the path by what someone else might be doing. There's also, though, an ensemble sense of drumming. So drumming can be done as an ensemble with people who are feeling the pulse the same way, experiencing it the same way, right? This is the point of drumming circles, for example.
Yeah.
Or an ensemble where there are other musicians, people playing other instruments and contributing to the whole of that. For me, the greatest joy in drumming has, even though mechanically it's been off doing a lot of things on my own because you're not playing with people all the time, but when you contribute to a feel, meaning musicians are locking into a certain feel, that's one of the greatest, most rewarding things for me musically to be able to do, is to provide that for somebody, to be part of that as a pulse. But again, it's this primal thing, right? Because if you think of drums in certain contexts, ancient context, it's about life, it's about movement, it's about breath, it's about feeling. And even with as sophisticated as music gets, it's still really about the same thing.
Yeah, it's healing. Drumming, they use drumming for healing as well. And I
Right.
was thinking, I play guitar and piano, and so I was thinking about the release also that can come through music and even drumming. Like, you're not using words, but I feel like the drums are speaking and expressing and releasing, and you're pouring no language out and into it, and yet it's speaking for you.
Yeah,
You know,
it's like a voice too. For
yeah.
me, just to be a little bit nerdy about it, the mirroring of a voice for me in drumming. So I'm always sub-vocalizing what I think a drum part sounds like. It goes up and down. It's not just a series of beats, but there's intonation to it, and it's again, it goes. I like really what you said about healing there. That's wonderful for that. I think it's because it connects so fundamentally with something that's so basically human.
So how has your perspective of home changed over the years that you grew up with your adoptive family and create a home of your own, and now you're in search of home? So tell us this evolution, and where do you think it's going?
I don't think I was as aware of it as a concept when I was younger, because I just was there. I lived with my family, my parents. I grew up there. It doesn't mean I necessarily felt I fit in all the ways. So I was aware of that too as I got older, that something wasn't quite the same. But I don't think I thought that it was escaping me the way it started to when I got into adulthood and when I was in relationships. And finally, when I was married for so many years. And I think the big thing that changed all of it was coming out of the fog, because it was easy to keep my head down that whole time up until then, not knowing something might be amiss, and then finally having all that slam into me in a single moment of coming out of the fog, which was what it was for me. There was a buildup to it, but suddenly it happened. It was suddenly a precipitated event, and everything fell away and felt very unfirm, like tenuous, like earth rolling under your feet sort of thing. So once I was about 51, 52, when I came out of the fog, yeah, almost 3 years ago right now, I no longer felt some of the safety that I thought I felt before. And I realized things I had taken for granted about, I would always have a place to live. I would always have this. I would always have these people in my life, was stripped away. And it became really uncertain that any of that was going to remain. And it all had to be built again on something new. So it really changed for me after coming out of the fog. And it's been undergoing refinement since then, because there was also deconstruction and deconversion of a religious tradition, but also a whole lot of training in that tradition and trying to make sense of what I knew from that and using that as some of the language of part of my own journey, figuring out what home actually meant for me. So I would say those are the transition times for me, and I'm just coming more into it now. And even in dialoguing with you about it really got me thinking about it more.
I see Simon is going to ask something. I just wanted to say, I think for you and for me, our coming out of the fog kind of converged right around the same time as marriage is ending. And I had deconstructed my faith maybe a decade before, but a lot of deconstruction. I think the beauty of coming out of the fog shifted me, I believe you as well, into our own agency in choosing what is home and what we want to create and how do we want to move forward in a much more empowered way, um, more consciously. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I saw Simon raise his hand. So yeah, Simon.
Great job, Jude. Great job. And great job, Greg, as well, of course. I just wanted to ask you, Greg, about the timing and the relationship between coming out of the fog and the divorce, because that was a natural curiosity thing that came up for me.
Yeah. So I think the decline had started before that, meaning before I was out of the fog, there were signs that things weren't healthy. a lot of that was around my mental state and the isolation I was going through for a number of years of depression, and then also in the pandemic phase. I was physically isolating and working in this room and staying in this room by myself apart from my family a lot of the time. And by the time we picked up as a family and relocated to another state, I was out of the fog, and I was forming new connections, new relationships with people who were helping me understand it. And about 6 months after that relocation, I realized that I'd been confronted and offered an ultimatum about certain things, which were in effect interpreted by me as you have to stop doing what you're doing, which is, it's not that they didn't want me to heal as much as I could from adoption trauma, but it was like, they don't really like the way you're going about it. So these are the demands. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't talk to these people, and you need to invest more in us than in what you're doing. And eventually that led to me saying, I can't give up the things that I've now got in my life that were, in a way, things I'd always been searching and hoping to have. And the ultimatum was not something I could honor, because it would be like trying to go back into the fog and act like my life now didn't exist. And I was just going to somehow reverse it and go back to ways other people were more comfortable with me being. And I just wasn't able to do that. So that was what precipitated my request for the divorce. And then it was finalized after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think having sat in circle at table with many adoptees, that is a theme, or I think a defining moment where we realize that we had been, in essence, abandoning ourselves or betraying ourselves often throughout our lives to fit in or to keep something going, and then to have a moment where we realize we can't do it anymore. And it sounds like that was that moment for you, that you chose in a really powerful way. And you had to consider the cost and consequence that came at a cost, and yet I think, having known you for a while, it's really propelled you into your own evolving wellness, wholeness, and greater sense of ease with who you are, like greater wholeness. So, and that, in my experience, has such huge value in how I interact with life, like how my life feels to me, how I feel about myself. Yeah.
It was
And
also the
then,
discovery of my trauma. So I discovered I wasn't healthy. I had broken a lot of relationships. I didn't know that I was inflicting my trauma on other people. And that was part of coming on the fog too, is that realization of why things had been breaking down the way they were. Part of that was just, I didn't know what I was doing wrong, or by wrong, I don't mean I was intentionally doing something. I just didn't realize what I was up against. And that, unfortunately, that did get carried out in my family sometimes. So I do take responsibility for that as well.
yeah, I think that is also part of that transition, right? Like, when I was in the fog, everything was happening out here, outside of me, and I could look at it and go, well, this, and this. And I was very unaware of my part. I couldn't see it. I was playing all these roles and I couldn't see my part of what, like what, um, how I self-sabotage, or how I was I was in a codependent marriage, but it was all him, right? Like, I couldn't see my part very clearly until I saw the wound, and then I could see, and then I could take responsibility, and then I could create change. Um, yeah. And so I really relate to that. Last night, I got to sit and listen to an interview that you did with Elsie. It was amazing. And you mentioned the adoptee ghost kingdom, right? The imaginary,
Mhm.
fantasy, uh, and like imaginary friends and playmates. I did the same thing, and I sat there and was like, gosh, I did that quite a bit. I lived in a real fantasy land as a child. And I think that's because my home didn't feel safe to me, although it was safe. I can see that now, but I didn't feel safe in the world. And so maybe I'd like to hear more about that because you called it the adoptee ghost kingdom. I was like, oh, I hadn't heard that term before. And so, do you mind sharing a little about that and your experience in your home growing up with that?
Yeah, and I don't, obviously that's not uh, my terminology for it. I've heard it in the community. I think Brian Stanton talks a lot about it. Other people talk a lot about the ghost kingdom. And so I've appropriated that as what was it like to imagine people that weren't really present in my life, thinking about what they could have been like, or in my case, it was thinking about possibility of siblings, or what would I want siblings to look like, to be like. I had grown up with two older adoptive sisters who were biological to my parents. And when I came to my parents at age 10, found out I was adopted, I felt this distance between me and my sisters that never fully went away after that, because I was just, I thought before, maybe there's something different, maybe there's not, but not at a real level of consciousness or sophistication. But when I finally found out we really were different, I never was able to recover some of that feeling of connection. So I think I started postulating as a young person, right, like around age 10 or so, maybe even 8 or 9 or 10, about
Mhm.
what do you think the people then would have been like? What would your real sisters have been like? And so I started putting people in place of them that I would pretend were real people. And what would that connection feel like, do you think? How do you think it would feel different? I wasn't asking myself that at an analytical level. It was being presented from my imagination as a way again, it had to do with whether I felt safe. As you said, it wasn't a question whether I was safe, but whether I felt it. And I have to say, I probably didn't feel safe anymore. That was a pretty important distinction you made there that I think is coming across as I think about it now. I probably did that because I didn't feel like I would ever feel connected the way I wished I would. And so maybe there were people out there like this that I was supposed to have been with, so to say, and I would have felt that connection with them. So for a number of years, I talked to them, thought about them, and it's funny because I always thought this is kind of embarrassing. Why do I do this? And I started hearing people talking about IFS and parts and like the things that LC talked about last night, and our friend Emma Stevens talks about in the gathering place, and I've started to hear about people really did experience parts of their lives that way as separate characters, maybe separate phases or stages of their own development. But for me, it was people that I imagined what they would be like if they were real in my life.
Now, you have had the opportunity to connect with some of your siblings, and right, like I think what did I guess in comparing, did you feel that connection? Did you when you met them? Yeah.
Yeah, and I had very different experiences on the different sides of the family. So the maternal reunion felt very different than the paternal reunion, for example. And there was a lot of honeymoon connection on my maternal side for me. And that wasn't the case because I went in with more tempered expectations many years later into my paternal reunion and didn't expect quite the same thing. So on my mother's side, I connected with my half brother and half sister through her, and I threw myself into that relationship with my sister. My sister was 14 years younger than me, and she did too, because she was excited. We were excited, and it went through some of the same dysfunction because of my trauma playing out and my insecurity playing out, and it broke at times, and I'd say I got weird from it for a while. I even was institutionalized briefly for it, to come a partial hospitalization, to work through feelings of abandonment, like she isn't paying attention to me the right way. What about this? What? So I found these things coming out of me that were very unexpected, and I thought I must just be a really bad person. I didn't feel that sort of thing years later when I connected with some of my brothers on my father's side. They were very direct about, it's nice to meet you. We probably won't be really strongly connected because our family doesn't connect very strongly. And so at least they told me that, and I found out that it's playing out that way. And could I say that was disappointing? Yeah, absolutely, because there's always, I think, that hope there that something could be deeper. I found instead that it's developing more with one of my aunts than it is with my siblings on my father's side, versus on my mother's side, it's more with my half brother on that side, and my sister isn't around as much. So, did they fulfill what I thought it would be like? No, but I did carry that fantasy into the first reunion for sure, and measured what was going on there that way. By the time the second one came around, many years later, I think I was wiser in not doing that, and just seeing what the reality was going to be from what they were reflecting back to me.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for your vulnerability and just sharing the intensity of that first reunion, the disappointment, and even the toll that it took on you. As you were talking, it was really giving me some clarity, because connection has been something I sought after. And I was adopted in the middle of two biological siblings. So they're my adopted parents' daughters, and I was in the middle, and I always thought that they felt something that I didn't. And I longed for the connection that I imagined they had. And I think there is a fantasy version of connection. And I think that I was, in my felt sense, imagining connection to be what is a trauma bond, right? And that's very intense. And what I have found coming out and finding wholeness is that connection isn't that. It's really different, and it is something we develop and we protect. And so it was really interesting that, I think there's that fantasy, and there is a moment or many moments of acceptance of what is, and coming into acceptance. You and I had a talk maybe a couple weeks ago that I wanted to share a little here about. It goes back to that elusiveness, and maybe a little of our own spirituality. But we were talking about home and finding home, and really finding that felt sense of home, and our own sense of identity, right? Because in this lived life, our human body is our home. It is where our soul, our consciousness lives. And you were talking about the promised land, like you kind of were equating the journey with that. Do you mind sharing? I felt like it was really beautiful and poignant. Do you mind sharing some of your thoughts around that with
Yeah,
us?
sure. And that was coming out partly from Judeo-Christian roots of
Mhm.
what's St. Augustine trying to call the city of God. But let's say you see some of this language in the New Testament about Abraham looking for the promise, and I'm not trying to get theological here, but the idea was that there was something, I'm going to use this word transcendent again, that human beings are looking for, seeking for, and wanting to feel. And it can go a couple ways, though. If you're in the religious tradition I was in, the idea was you won't find it here for sure. So it became something otherworldly, became something to look forward to. And this world is not my home, and it's all passing away. And that was what I was immersed in for decades. And then that's sometimes called pie in the sky. or thinking my reward isn't here. I'm never going to feel it here. So all I'm going to have is travail and tears and suffering here. And so I better get used to it. And that can be really daunting to think about if it's really that elusive to the point where you don't even have a chance for anything like that in this life. So if I were to say demythologize that, by that I mean take out some of the elements that are otherworldly and say what happens in the world here, what happens in my life here. There seems to be, I think, as I mentioned, more of a universal human experience that I believe is part of our human faculties, part of our makeup, to want that belonging, to want that connection, and to have some degree of it to be able to be realized here. Not because we're compromisers and worldly people that don't set our minds on spiritual things, but because this is, after all, the theater of our existence. This is where we live out our lives as embodied persons. And so it makes a lot of sense that the time we spend here would have some connection to the level of fulfillment we might be able to achieve. And maybe there is something beyond that comes for a greater fulfillment at a certain time beyond, let's say, beyond the veil or beyond what's on earth here. But it doesn't mean that the things we find here can't be really, really supportive and edifying for us. So that was, I think, what I was trying to aim at there, was that I didn't want it to be the case that I had, so the past I had been that way, thinking you tend to view the world as kind of a danger zone. Then stay away from this, don't do this, don't do that, don't have expectations of anything to go well or good, because this is a fallen world. And once I was cleared of that, you could see that there were beautiful things here and good things here that were worthy of feeling satisfied over just in their own terms, and had nothing to do with me being less spiritual or caught up in worldly things. It was just, this is where we exist right now. So what can we find here that satisfies us?
Yeah, and not to like not to be like I guess too spiritual or but what comes to mind, so I'm going to share it. Like Jesus said, right? The kingdom of heaven is inside of you, and we can bring it forth to this earth. And no matter who we think he is, I do like that saying that there is beauty within us, right? We can create home, which is my terminology, but we can create a beauty, we can create joy, we can create um, loving connection. It is within us to do, and we can bring it out. And in that essence, um, create a beautiful world. You know, that what we do impacts the quality of life that we're living. And I think that we can seek that quality. And I guess as an adoptee, I just want to say, like, that doesn't have to hinder us. We deserve all that we have longed for and sought after in this life. Like, you know, we deserve that. And yeah, so what is your process, if you have one? And we'll finish with this. I'm thinking we're coming up on that, but of creating home within yourself. You know, do you have one? How are you navigating creating that for yourself?
Yeah, I think that I will say that being as regulated emotionally as I can be is a big part of that. If everything feels like a war zone, sorry if that's the opinion there. If everything feels like a war zone emotionally and psychologically, I'm not able to find that source of, again, contentment or equanimity, peacefulness of mind. So trying to maintain, to the greatest degree I can, a calm demeanor, calm peacefulness about me, and not getting caught up in a lot of things. But I do struggle with anxieties. I think so many of us do. Trying to make sure that inwardly, as a person who has had obsessions and had a lot of inner turmoil, I found that at least lately, some of that's fallen away and allowed me to say that I'm enjoying much more calm inwardly, and I think that's a big part of it. It's just, and there are exercises for that. You are a great practitioner of that, and somebody I've learned from, right? So you know it's connected to our body and not just our minds, right? The Greeks said a healthy mind and a healthy body, that and beyond the Greeks, right? In Eastern thought, etc., that there's this continual loop between the mind and the body, and what we can do to take care of. I wish I took better care of my body. I need to do that. So that's something I will say that might actually help me, because what we're perceiving somatically, we experience emotionally too, right? So when I don't feel good emotionally, sometimes it's because I haven't been taking good care of myself.
Yeah, that's really good, right? Because they say mind, body, but often it's body and mind, right? Like there really is no separation. And
Right.
so, like I said, our body is our home for this lifetime. So how we self-care, I know can be a challenge for us. We're learning to love ourselves, we're practicing to love ourselves, but taking care of this body, definitely, when I am in those practices, I feel so much better. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. And then, like, okay, you intentionally, and you referenced this, but you intentionally call where you live a house, or where I live instead of home. So what is the difference for you between a house and a home?
Yeah, I call it where I stay. It's almost like you would call it a domicile or a pup tent or something. And I don't mean I physically am in a tent. I'm in a place with walls, and I'm actually about to get out of there today or tomorrow, in fact, into something more permanent. It's the fact that there was a great existential restlessness in me to say, I can't settle for where I am physically right now. So I had adapted that sense of talking as though I was staying somewhere versus I was living somewhere. And I applied that across a lot of conversations, and people noticed it, that I always kept saying that. And they said, what happens if you accepted that you lived there? I said, no, I'm not ready to accept that I live here, because that's an abiding sense that I will not have in my current physical location. I need to be somewhere that's healthier for me, better for me, that's more settled, more permanent. And that's what I'm actually I'm literally within hours of having in place. So this is kind of an exciting time for the conversation, because
You're finding home.
Yeah, so I am prepared to say I do think that will be what home feels like. And I have assiduously avoided saying that before. So what a timely conversation. Say that I think it's an impermanence feeling. I think it's a restlessness feeling. Why I couldn't say I was living somewhere, but I had to talk about staying there instead of, I didn't want to get comfortable with where I was, not be in a driven sense of I can do better, I can achieve more, but I just knew it wasn't the place for me where I was going to feel finally settled.
What I hear, and it's actually, quite beautiful, is you're a really tender friend and soul, and you have such a nice awareness of yourself. And so what I'm hearing is that even when you moved into this place, I feel that you had the understanding, whether you were conscious of it or not, that you were in a transformative time. And so it's been this arc of transformation. And so you knew it wasn't where you were settling, and that your language was lining up with what was inside of you,
Yeah.
in the realms that I work with within energy, that helps with that growth, that helps with that creating in your outer world what's inside our inner world, because we have to build the inner capacity to hold it. You know, we talk about up leveling or, you know, higher states of being, but we don't go, you know, adoptees with a root wound, we don't go from these lower frequency feelings to home, like boom, boom. It is
Yeah.
this journey home. We walk each other home, and it is incremental, and we have to build the capacity to hold those higher frequency feelings. And so, you know, I'm summing it up because you've shared with us in this talk this little peaks of your journey, this transformative journey that got you to today, to looking for home. So I feel really excited. I feel like it is timely. And I don't know, just thank you for coming and sharing it with us. I really appreciate you.
I think it's a really unique conversation, and I really appreciate how you've guided it and Simon's input
Thank
as
you.
well. I'll be really interested to hear what other people are, how it's playing out in their lives too. But thank you for pulling this together.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow. Fantastic. What can I say? What can I say to that? The building capacity thing.
Yeah.
I'd kind of, what's the opposite of that?
If we are not building capacity, then often, and there is no judgment or shame, but often it just, I think often it's just smaller amounts, and it's kind of like working muscles, you know, and um, we have to, we were in the fog for as long as we need to be in the fog. And when we had the capacity to hold the truth of coming out of the fog, then we came out of the fog, right? So I guess I'm saying I would never want to judge where someone else is at in their journey or how long they need to circle around a narrative, because every time we circle around it, we're seeing different perspectives. And when we're ready for that to fall away, it does. And so we're always building capacity, and our pacing may be different.
Yeah.
Right. So we can never put our pace on someone else. It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that came to me was, are we building capacity, or are we getting rid of the stuff that's
It's both.
blocking?
It's both. And I think when we begin to consciously build capacity, it goes quicker.
Yeah.
That's good.
Like Greg, I'd be delighted to hear what people make of this. Thank you very much, guys, for this.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you, listeners. We will speak to you very soon, unless there's anything else you want to share, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity. Really like what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're good. Thanks, listeners. Speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.